Percy Sillitoe is best remembered today as the inventor of the black and white checkered hatband worn by police officers throughout the world. He deserves to be remembered for much more. For much of the first half of the 20th century, he dominated policing in Scotland as one of the country's most influential leaders. In no small measure, the police service of today is the legacy of his vision and determination. He was a champion of early IT, of specialist civilian posts, of women in the police service, and of his passion for forensic scientific methods. Sillitoe rose to power on the reputation as a tough, no-nonsense cop, which indeed he was, but he was also a clear-headed and highly intelligent leader who championed reform wherever he went. The early days of Percy Joseph Sillitoe gave some clue as to his future promise. Born in London in 1888, the young Percy was gifted with a beautiful singing voice, so much so that he won a scholarship to the prestigious St. Paul's Cathedral Choir School. There he sang at all the great occasions of state, including the 1902 memorial service for Queen Victoria. But he also took advantage of the excellent education offered to choristers, and by the time his voice broke, he was well schooled and ready for foreign adventure. In 1908, the 20-year-old headed for South Africa to join the British South Africa Police as a mounted trooper. A greater contrast to the choir school at St. Paul's can hardly be imagined, but Sillitoe proved a natural policeman. The main role of mounted troopers was the suppression of poaching and the tribal gangs who murdered, raped and robbed across the vast South African veldt. It was brutal, uncompromising, a guerrilla war, and casualties were high on both sides. It was during these early years that Sillitoe developed the tough techniques for breaking up criminal gangs that were to serve him so well in his later career. His reputation was already growing, and he was soon promoted and transferred to the Northern Rhodesian Police, where he was introduced to the shadowy world of intelligence. He proved particularly adept at recruiting and running informants. Nothing undermines a criminal group like a police informant in their midst, and so effective was Sillitoe in this risky area of work that he was soon working in intelligence full-time. During the First World War, he was seconded as a political officer to Tanganyika, honing his counterinsurgency skills in the hit-and-run war against the Germans. In 1920, still a young man but with a vast experience, it was time to seek pastures new and return home to pursue a career in policing. After a few false starts, he took the post of Chief Constable in the small forces of Chesterfield and then the East Riding, before being appointed Chief of Sheffield in 1926. On arrival, he found the old industrial city in the grip of violent local criminal gangs, including elements of the now famous Peaky Blinders. Violent thugs they may have been, but they were no match for Sillitoe. Following the euphemistically named doctrine of reasonable force that had been so effective in South Africa, he quickly built a crude intelligence-based operation, recruited a number of well-placed informants, and introduced flying squads of officers handpicked for their toughness. Much of the gang activity centred on betting scams and protection rackets. Over a period of months, Sillitoe laid his plans, then sent in his flying squads. He smashed the gangs, ensuring the ringleaders all got lengthy prison sentences. His reputation as a gangbuster was made, and soon he was in demand as many old industrial cities struggled to deal with violent gangs that thrived during the Depression of the 1920s. London, Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool all had their gang problems, but in Glasgow, the second city of empire, the gangs had taken such a hold as to threaten the civic governance of the city. The novel No Mean City describes the razor gangs that terrorised the teeming slums of Glasgow, but there were many more in that period, some based on neighbourhoods, others like the Billy Boys based on religious loyalties. The gangs were thoroughly embedded in the fabric of the city. They were involved in territorial turf wars, organised crime, protection rackets, and political corruption, as well as housebreaking and theft on an industrial scale. It was into that mess of crime and corruption that Sillitoe dropped when appointed Chief Constable in 1931. The city fathers were desperately worried about the future of their city. so as a condition of his appointment, had promised their new chief a free hand to take on the gangs. Sillitoe, by then a physically imposing and confident man, held them to their word. In 1931, the City of Glasgow Police, the largest force in Scotland, was badly run down and underfunded, with dozens of decrepit police stations, leftovers from the Victorian age. The senior officers were little better, many long past retiral age. The rank and file were good enough, but had been poorly led for years. They were unfit, and drunkenness was common. Sillitoe acted quickly, brooking no interference. He reduced the number of divisions and sold off many of his old crumbling police stations. He then forced the retirement of most of his older senior officers, rapidly promoting able young men to fill their place. Then he set to work developing intelligence and getting his men fit for the battle with the gangs. The doctrine of reasonable force would once again be at the centre of his strategy, and to get the force in shape, he hired a champion boxer to train his men in self-defence. Promoting this as general physical fitness, he even persuaded Glasgow's largest newspaper, the Daily Record, to present a silver boxing trophy. As his men grew fitter and more confident, he was also developing Scotland's first fingerprint bureau. While in Sheffield, he'd been impressed by the emerging technique of using fingerprints and marks in the detection of crime. He guessed that the active thieves of Glasgow were sloppy and forensically unaware, so he headhunted one of Sheffield's top fingerprint men, Bertie Hammond, and tempted him north to Glasgow for a double promotion. Hammond was given a straightforward brief: build a fingerprint bureau, train crime scene examiners to lift marks on the scenes of crime, take the fingerprints of all criminals when arrested in the city, then match them up. It was simple, and it worked. Sillitoe had been right. The Glasgow thieves were sloppy, and now they were arrested in their dozens. True to form, many thieves facing long terms of imprisonment opted to become informants. The scene was set. The penetration of their criminal networks unnerved the gang leaders, and it was then that the now fit and confident Glasgow police struck in a rolling series of raids. Reasonable force was frequently applied. Sillitoe wanted his force to send a message, and it did. Glasgow's mounted police were even used. With his experience of mounted police operating in South Africa, Sillitoe's Cossacks, as they became known, became a feared and effective measure against the large groups of thugs that gathered in their heartlands. The High Court of Justice did the rest. 5 years imprisonment for possession of an offensive weapon was not uncommon. Just as in Sheffield, the gangs were routed. The city of Glasgow breathed a sigh of relief. Their new chief had been as good as his reputation, a true gangbuster. The city fathers were content. Order had been restored, but Sillitoe was far from finished, and with his stock now high, he was not to be denied. Despite his reputation as a gangbuster, Sillitoe only saw reasonable force as a means to an end. He was a thoughtful and intelligent man who had a plan for the future of policing, and at its heart were scientific methods. His fingerprint bureau was getting established, but there was much more. While in Sheffield, he'd been impressed by the forensic work of a young Scottish doctor, James Webster, later a professor of forensic medicine. It was he who first influenced Sillitoe's thinking. There were many branches of scientific methods that he wanted to develop. Accepting that he could not do it alone, he persuaded the other big city forces in Scotland to invest in other branches, in other areas. Edinburgh began to specialise in forensic photography and the science of hairs and fibres. Crucially, Sillitoe recognised the immense capability that existed in Scotland's universities. He courted the professors of forensic medicine in Glasgow and Edinburgh universities, encouraging the Crown Office, the head of the prosecution service, to form a partnership so that for the first time there was a professional forensic service across most of Scotland. There was some resistance, of course. Many small forces were wary of Big Brother, but Sillitoe was subtle, offering the assistance of some of his best men when small forces needed help. There was never any charge made. All assistance was given in the common good. Eventually, suspicions were allayed so that when Chief Constable's posts fell vacant in small rural forces, the appointment of one of Sillitoe's bright young men made sense. Back home, Sillitoe was busy modernising Glasgow police. He had managed to keep the money from selling his old police stations, and now he used it to introduce radio cars, police boxes in all the city's busiest spots, and recruit specialist civilians and women officers. As his reputation grew, he began to reach out internationally. While serving in England, he had been wary of the sometimes overpowering influence of the Metropolitan Police, particularly in forensic matters. Instead, while attending a conference in Chicago in 1933, he forged alliances with the FBI, becoming friends with Director J. Edgar Hoover, who would sometimes consult him on intelligence matters. Throughout, Sillitoe knew that his beliefs in forensic scientific methods were not enough. He had to convince others, especially politicians, of his doctrine. The opportunity came in September 1935 when the dismembered remains of two bodies were found in the remote borderlands of Dumfriesshire. The local Chief Constable, William Black, with one of Sillitoe's protégés, it would be an ideal high-profile case to showcase forensics. Without hesitation, Sillitoe sent two of his most senior detectives and Bertie Hammond, the fingerprint expert, to the small town of Moffat, where the body's parts lay. He knew that the brilliant forensic science professor, John Glaister, was en route from Glasgow. All the right people were in place. Professor Glaister and his colleague, Professor Sidney Smith, were amongst the most brilliant forensic minds of the 20th century. They shared Sillitoe's belief in the importance of scientific methods in investigating crime, and they worked well together. They had much in common. Both had served as young army doctors in the First World War. Their brilliance was tempered by hard-won experience. The relationship with the police was a mutually beneficial arrangement. The police got first-class forensic advice, the Crown, the prosecution service, got best evidence, and the learned professors got fresh cases on which to base their research and teaching. The Dumfriesshire or Ruxton murders, as they became known, were the sensation of the pre-war age. The victims were a glamorous doctor's wife and her maid. The murders, a gruesome dismemberment and scattering of body parts. The culprit, Dr. Buck Ruxton, a suave French-Indian doctor, was a villain straight from the pages of Agatha Christie. The forensic investigation that followed was spellbinding. Professor Glaister and Smith developed no less than 3 distinct new strands of science to present as evidence. The show trial that followed drew worldwide press attention, and when Ruxton was convicted, the triumph of forensic methods was complete. In his summing up, the trial judge had made the extraordinary remarks that he had found it difficult to imagine greater skill being used than was used by these distinguished professors of Edinburgh and Glasgow universities in putting together these pieces in their examination and in arriving at their conclusion. The trial and worldwide publicity were just what Sillitoe had been waiting for. Together with the professors, he used the prestige of the Ruxton case to bring about major change. All police forces would establish forensic capabilities for the first time. Detectives would be specially trained in forensic evidence and crime scene management. Even the usually tight-fisted government was persuaded to set up expensive regional forensic laboratories in Scotland's main cities. It was the dawn of a new age. Thereafter, all crime would be investigated using scientific methods. The redoubtable Professors Glaister and Smith were the pioneers of this seismic change, but Percy Sillitoe was one of the principal architects. As well as working to embed forensic science in the mainstream of criminal investigation, Sillitoe was still modernising the City of Glasgow Police, and by example, the rest of Scotland's police forces. Increased use of radio, women officers, a structured approach towards criminal intelligence, and the recruitment of criminal informants were all prioritised. This last speciality of Sillitoe's was to come to prominence as the Second World War approached. No one really knows how long and to what extent Sillitoe was involved with Britain's Internal Security Service, MI5, before the war. He was certainly working in intelligence as far back as his African days, and it is likely that his relationship was maintained from that time. What is not in doubt is that during the Second World War, he played a key role in the intelligence war. It's even been suggested that he was the architect of the spectacularly successful double-cross scheme. In the early years of the war, with invasion planned and few deep cover agents in place, Germany flooded Britain with invasion spies. Poorly trained, second-rate operatives were sent in numbers. Most were caught within hours of landing, and many quickly turned into double agents, feeding false information back to their masters and thoroughly confusing the German high command. It has all the hallmarks of a Sillitoe ploy, just as he had used to undermine the criminal gangs of Sheffield and Glasgow. We may never know his true role in Double Cross, but his position within the security and intelligence world was confirmed in early 1944 when he was directed to move from his beloved Glasgow to take the job of Chief Constable of Kent County in the southernmost tip of England. Sillitoe had declined numerous offers of jobs over the years. His reputation as a first-class officer went before him, but Glasgow had become his city, and besides, there was still work to do both in the city and wider Scotland. When it came, the order to move to Kent was irresistible, coming from Prime Minister Churchill himself. The county of Kent was to be the jumping-off point for the invasion of Europe in the summer of 1944. Security was vital. Deception was crucial to success. The newly knighted Sir Percy Sillitoe moved quickly to take on the job. Following his usual pattern, Sillitoe speedily modernised Kent Police, introducing tight security controls and recruiting a large body of women officers to augment his force. The success of this operation may be judged from the fact that up to the day of the invasion, German intelligence were uncertain as to where and when the landings would take place. It was a triumph of security and deception, and it was to lead to what was Sillitoe's greatest challenge. At the end of the war, amidst the victory celebrations, there came the cold realisation that many British military secrets had been leaked to USSR during the war. Now rivals in the emerging Cold War, the leaks were set to undermine the trust between Britain and the United States. The traitors had to be hunted down and stopped. The role of spycatcher was that of the national security organisation MI5, and who better to lead the hunt than Sir Percy Sillitoe? Appointed Director General of MI5 in 1946, he headed a painstaking investigation, trawling through thousands of pieces of information and interrogating hundreds of informants, agents and double agents. It was already too late. The Foreign Intelligence Service, MI6, was itself the source of the treachery. Thoroughly penetrated by idealist communist agents before the war, the full extent of the damage only became known years later. The Cambridge spy ring of Blunt, Burgess, MacLean and Philby had been betraying their country for years, while Klaus Fuchs had passed nuclear secrets to USSR, even while the atomic bomb was being built. When the extent of their activity became public, Sillitoe was blamed for not preventing the disaster. The criticism was unfair. The Cambridge ring had been operating for 15 years before he took over MI5. The rot had well and truly set in long before he arrived. True to form, Sillitoe stayed at MI5 long enough to shape the service into the modern organisation it is today. By 1948, at the age of 60, Sillitoe was ready to retire, but not without a final flourish. De Beers, the international diamond mining and traders, were having security problems. Operating across South and Central Africa, their grip on smuggling routes from Liberia to Sierra Leone had slipped during the war years. The violent armed gangs controlling these routes were out of control, and it had reached crisis point. Who better to tackle the problem than Sir Percy Sillitoe? His gang-busting prowess was legend. He knew Africa, and his links with foreign intelligence services were excellent. But more than that, he had an international reputation of a man of action and ability. His name opened doors. Not even the most indifferent foreign government could deny the famous Sir Percy. He eventually won the last battle of his 40-year war against gangs, but it was a bloody affair. His men were well armed but poorly trained. The body count was high, especially amongst the hapless young couriers ferrying contraband for a few pennies. Sillitoe's feelings on this last mission are not recorded, but knowing his high professional standards, there must have been regrets. In a final twist, the young novelist Ian Fleming, himself a former intelligence officer, was fascinated and based his book, The Diamond Smugglers, on Sillitoe's last mission. Later, this novel would be adapted as Diamonds Are Forever, the James Bond classic. The final chapter of Sillitoe's life took a strange turn. For some reason, he had always fancied running a confectionery shop, so in 1953, after stepping away from public life, he moved to Eastbourne and opened his sweet shop. It was a pipe dream. He soon found that his immense skill set did not fit him for life as a retailer. The shop closed after a few months. Gradually, his tough, active life brought health problems, and he died in 1962 at the age of 74. Today, the full record of his achievements has faded from popular memory. This year, on the 60th anniversary of his death, he deserves to be remembered afresh. He was the one-time choir boy who went on to become one of the greatest police leaders of the 20th century. Mounted trooper, intelligence officer, gangbuster, spy master, and champion of forensic science. In one way or another, everybody who works in police or forensic services today stands on the shoulders of Percy Joseph Sillitoe. The story of Percy Sillitoe was written and read by me, Tom Wood, author of Ruxton, The First Modern Murder, the best-selling account of the 1935 Ruxton murders and their huge impact. The book is published by Ringwood Publications.